Revenge with Karen.
The last email Jennifer sent before getting erased was a reminder about asbestos mitigation at property she'd personally flagged back in 2014, a converted textile mill that 3 CFOs ago swore would print money. That building later turned out to have more mold than equity, and the only thing it printed was lawsuits. Jennifer handled it quietly, like she always did. No credit, no press releases, just a line item marked resolved in the quarterly compliance report. 12 years of that. 12 years of fixing what other people broke while they were out playing golf and pretending they invented zoning variances. 12 years of burying personal birthdays under tax map overlays and building use easements. If there was a deal with hair on it, Jennifer brushed it down, polished it up, and filed the permit herself. Cypress Holdings grew from a half-baked boutique fund into a $2B regional powerhouse off the back of Jennifer's quiet, unsexy brilliance. But no one wrote her name in the shareholder letters. No one mentioned her in glossy investor decks. She wasn't even listed on the company website until some intern added her under compliance support, which was both wrong and insulting. Still, she stayed, because some people don't work for applause. They work for precision. Just a quick aside, because let's be real, 93% of you listening to this haven't hit the subscribe button yet. If you're the kind of person who enjoys watching a quiet underdog pull the pin on a grenade made of paperwork, maybe toss us a like and subscribe. It actually motivates the whole team more than coffee and lawsuits combined. All right, back to Jennifer, who was the kind of VP who could recite parcel ID numbers from memory and knew which counties had building inspectors with gambling debts. She once restructured a 4-property deal mid-flight using only hotel Wi-Fi and a copy of a legacy lease stored in her inbox since 2011. When the old partners ran the company, they knew exactly who she was, even if they didn't parade her around. That was the old order. The founding 3, Levin, Chan, and Delaro. Smart men, but not operators. They had vision, cash, and chaos. Jennifer was the one who turned their maybes into closings. She created the compliance framework that kept their risk low enough to borrow cheap and often. When their urban infill plan went sideways, she rewrote the entire project scope overnight and personally got the variance approved through a backdoor advisory board vote. Again, no credit, just results. Her desk was a war zone of red folders, site maps, and coffee rings. She was always 5 steps ahead, which meant she was never thanked in the moment, only when things didn't blow up. And yet, she was getting tired. Not of the work, but of the invisibility. Her name was never on the marquee, but her fingerprints were on everything. Every asset ledger passed through her. Every clause in every partnership agreement had been combed over by her. She didn't just manage the deals, she quietly protected the entire machine from itself, until they sold. That was the first crack in the foundation. Word got out that Levin and Chan were cashing out. Delaro, who'd always leaned on Jennifer the most, pulled her into his office with a look that said too much and nothing at all. "Just keep things steady," he said. "And if it goes sideways, use your best judgment." He didn't have to say more. She already knew the deal. A new majority stakeholder was inbound, which meant sharks, consultants, people who'd never built anything but were great at slicing it apart. She pulled the founding joint venture agreement out of her file drawer that night. Not a copy, the original, still smelled like the envelope glue she licked back in 2011. And as she sat there, alone in the office with a dying fluorescent bulb overhead, she reread every single clause. Because if there's one thing Jennifer knew, it's this: people forget what they signed. Paper doesn't. Grant Pelham walked into Cypress Holdings like he was picking out which parts to gut. Tall, overconfident, and gleaming like a rental Porsche, he had the handshake of a man who thinks sincerity is a brand strategy. His team, an assortment of aggressively mediocre Ivy Leaguers with polished teeth and dead eyes, wore matching pocket squares and moved through the office like real estate locusts. They called it a modernization. Jennifer could already smell the rot behind their smiles. She'd seen this movie before. Hell, she could have storyboarded it. The minute Grant's group finalized their majority buyout of Levin and Chan's shares, the culture shifted like drywall under a flood. Desks were cleared. Legacy roles were reassessed. New titles appeared out of thin air: strategic vision partner, real estate transformation lead, chief narrative officer. Jennifer's job title suddenly became a question mark on a whiteboard in a room she wasn't invited into. No formal demotion, just silence. First, she stopped getting copied on acquisition reports. Then her access to the shared compliance drive quietly expired. When she flagged it to IT, they said, "Oh, you'll need to get that cleared with Grant's office." When she asked Grant's assistant, the response came with a forced smile and a calendar invite for a role transition discussion. Meeting was a formality. Two HR reps she'd never met before sat across from her with clipboards and phrases like operational streamlining and reorganizational synergies. It was less a conversation and more like being read a eulogy while still breathing. "Jennifer, your contributions have been deeply valued, and this isn't about performance, it's about evolving needs." Her left eye twitched. She said nothing. "We're offering a generous 2-week severance, plus Cobra continuation." She raised a hand. "You don't need to list the benefits. Just give me the packet." The younger one, fresh from whatever boot camp turns kindness into corporate detachment, blinked. Of course. She stood, smoothed her skirt, picked up her pen from the table, not to take notes, but out of habit. Then she nodded once like a priest closing a casket, not angry, not broken, just done. "But the thing about Jennifer, you don't reorganize her out. You just forget to notice she's still in the room, reading everything on the walls." Because while they stripped her title and wiped her from the internal directory, they didn't revoke her historical access. Not yet. Her name still appeared on half the original joint venture documents buried in the archive folders. She was still an original signer on 3 redevelopment frameworks that no one had bothered to update. Her inbox, until they shut it down, still filled with negotiation threads, timestamps, scanned exhibits, and signed PDFs they now treated like paperweights. Grant and his cronies made a show of shaking things up. They bragged in the Friday all-hands about clearing out the clutter and making room for visionaries. Someone even said, "We don't need librarians, we need pirates." Jennifer watched from her desk, sipping lukewarm coffee from her Asset Whisperer mug. She'd kept the all-hands Zoom open, audio off, just to watch them pat each other on the back. When they called her name, Jennifer Daniels, longtime VP of Strategic Holdings, has decided to explore new opportunities. No one looked at the camera. No one asked her to speak. No one even said goodbye. She didn't offer one either. But on her final day, she stayed late. After everyone else had left, she logged into the legal archive one last time, downloaded a full asset transfer register from the internal ledger system, and emailed it to herself under the subject line, "For reference, Legacy Holdings Confidential." She attached a sticky note to her monitor. It read, "Nobody reads the riders." Then she shut off the lights, walked out without fanfare, and left her badge in a planter by the elevator. They thought she'd leave empty-handed. They were half right. 8 months before Grant Pelham and his band of buzzword pirates stormed the gates, Jennifer sat in her office at 9:47 p.m. eating stale pretzels and reviewing the 5th draft of a redevelopment framework for something called the Crosswell Urban Parcel Alignment, CUPA, because acronyms were how people in real estate convinced themselves they were saving the world. It was a Frankenstein deal. 7 parcels, 3 municipalities, 2 owners in litigation over air rights. Jennifer called it the Lasagna Project because every time you pulled back a layer, it got messier and smelled faintly of grease. But it mattered. Crosswell was one of Cyprus's legacy projects, one of the original acquisitions from the company's bootstrap days, back when Levin and Chan still argued over whether to buy office chairs or parking lot drainage permits. It had historical bones. It had a bad soil report. It had a half-demolished trolley depot that every preservation society in the tri-state area wanted to turn into a museum, yoga studio, or both. And it had risk. So much risk, which is exactly why Jennifer added the clause. It started innocently enough. A side paragraph in a section nobody read, buried under Joint Redevelopment Oversight Protocol. She drafted a rider stating that any transfer of portfolio assets exceeding $40 million in market-adjusted value would require written and notarized consent from all original signatories to the joint venture framework. The intent, she argued at the time, was legacy protection. "We don't want a future stakeholder flipping these properties to a parking lot conglomerate just to juice the quarterly report," she'd said in a late afternoon meeting with Delaro and Levin. Levin, half distracted and chewing nicotine gum like it owed him money, grunted. "Sure, add it. Sounds like good governance." Delaro, always the pragmatist, raised an eyebrow. "You'll make sure it doesn't tie our hands on minor moves?" "I carved out exemptions for anything under 40, Jennifer replied, not looking up from her screen. This only kicks in for portfolio-level moves. Big ones. Fine. Laro nodded. Send the draft. I'll sign. She watched them e-sign it from their phones during a meeting about something else entirely. Nobody asked follow-up questions. Nobody flagged the clause, because that's the thing about corporate governance. It's boring until it's a bomb. Jennifer saved the fully executed document to 3 different folders, backed it up on a private encrypted drive, and printed 2 hard copies, one for the legal archive and one for herself. Placed her personal copy in a manila folder labeled Cupid JVV5 Final, then scribbled consent writer trigger clause on the tab and slid it into her second drawer, behind an old stapler and a faded brochure for an arbitration seminar in Tulsa she never got around to attending. Then she went back to work, like always. She didn't think about it much after that. She wasn't planning revenge. She wasn't trying to outmaneuver anyone. She just knew, deep down in the tired, unglamorous part of her gut, that Cypress was getting too fast, too loose, too arrogant. And someone had to be the adult in the room. So she laid the groundwork, a legal tripwire dressed up as policy. A thing no one would notice until they tripped over it. And over the months that followed, as Grant Pelham circled like a shark sniffing blood in the spreadsheets, Jennifer watched him, watched how he ignored history, how he spoke in absolutes. He said things like legacy constraints are just psychological barriers, and let's be disruptive. He never once asked about the old redevelopment frameworks, never even knew they existed. And when she was finally cut loose with 2 weeks severance and a politely weaponized smile, Jennifer didn't yell, didn't protest, didn't even flinch. She just walked home that night and opened her second drawer, slid out the folder, smoothed it on the table, and under her breath, she said, "Let's be disruptive." The first time Jennifer realized she'd been fully erased, it was over lunch, if you could call half a banana and a packet of almonds lunch. She was working freelance on a zoning appeal for a friend's architecture firm, mostly just to keep her brain busy, when she got curious and checked Cypress Holdings' public project ledger out of habit. The drop-down menu that used to list her as compliance principal now read vacant. Credentials were gone. Even the quarterly memos she used to author had been stripped of bylines, rebranded Cypress Transformation Insights. She clicked through one of them, scanned it, and snorted. They'd reused her risk analysis from Q1, word for word, except now it ended with a bullet point about future-forward leadership, whatever the hell that meant. She didn't need applause, never did, but erasure? That was a different kind of theft. It got worse. She heard from a former analyst, one of the few decent ones Grant hadn't purged, that internal folders labeled JD. Oversight had been renamed Legacy Review. A consultant from New York had been brought in to streamline compliance redundancies. Jennifer translated that in her head. They're throwing darts at contracts they don't understand and hoping the building doesn't fall down. At a happy hour she didn't attend. Fresh-faced hire with a LinkedIn smile called her legacy overhead loud enough for 3 vendors to hear. Apparently, it got a laugh. They even bragged about cleaning house on an investor call. Someone said we had to do a hard reset, cut the dead code, and get lean. Jennifer was the dead code, apparently. The system they were rebooting from. But the final slap came in a 3-paragraph draft press release she intercepted through a former contact on the buyer's side. The $375 million portfolio deal. The same one she architected over 3 brutal years of environmental surveys, easement battles, and multi-city negotiations, was now being hailed as a visionary consolidation led by Grant Pelham, whose leadership redefined Cypress's approach to urban repositioning. No mention of the woman who negotiated half the air rights while eating cold dumplings in her car during Stormwater Board meetings. No line about the fact that Jennifer was the one who figured out how to cluster zoning overlays across 3 jurisdictions to avoid commercial reassessment. No Jennifer, period. She stared at the release in her inbox for a full 10 minutes. No rage, no tears, just a cold, clear sensation, stepping barefoot onto tile in February. She didn't need her name on it. She didn't even want it. She just wanted it accurate. Because here's what they didn't realize. The $375 deal wasn't one deal. It was 6 interconnected properties bound by a patchwork of shared liabilities and regulatory obligations. And in one of those, specifically, the Crosswell redevelopment framework, there existed a little clause. A rider, signed 8 months earlier, stating that no asset exceeding a certain threshold could be transferred without consent from all original signatories. They could rewrite press releases. They could change access credentials. They could bury her in jargon and puffery. But what they couldn't do was change the fact that on paper, in a file folder now tucked into a secure lockbox at Jennifer's apartment, there was a clause that could crater the entire deal. And the best part, didn't even remember it existed. Jennifer looked at the closing date listed in the press release. It was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks until they poured the champagne and smiled for the cameras. 3 weeks until a buyer's counsel, likely some underpaid but overly thorough junior associate, actually read the fine print. 3 weeks until someone realized one name was missing. She didn't want revenge. She wanted the truth to have a timestamp. Jennifer waited until exactly 9:06 a.m. on a Tuesday to send the email, not because it mattered legally, but because she knew that's when mid-level acquisition agents were caffeinated enough to care, but not yet drowning in calls from managing directors who thought PowerPoint could bend reality. The email was short. Just 3 sentences and a subject line that read, "Minor framework irregularity, JV5 consent rider," landed in the inbox of a man named Thomas R. Klein, Senior Acquisitions Advisor at Bellway Holdings, the buyer. A name she remembered from a dinner in 2019 where he drank club soda and took notes on napkins. The kind of man who carried a mechanical pencil because it feels less aggressive than a pen. Jennifer knew his type, quietly terrified of risk, desperately allergic to being the guy who missed something. Her message read, "Thomas may want to review the Crosswell framework from 2021, specifically the rider under Section 11D. There's a compliance inconsistency tied to consent authority that may require immediate attention prior to execution. Best, JD." She didn't sign with her full name. Didn't need to. If he was smart, he'd remember. If he wasn't, none of this would matter anyway. 2 hours later, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. A second buzz. This time, a text. "Jennifer, reviewed Section 11D. Please call me ASAP. Confidential." TRK, she took a deep breath, reheated her coffee, then called him back. The line picked up on the first ring. "No pleasantries. Why didn't anyone mention this clause?" he asked. Jennifer didn't smile, but her voice was steady. "Because no one read it, or more likely, they assumed it was ceremonial. And it's not. It's notarized, time-stamped, still binding. Especially if the aggregate transfer value crosses the 40 million threshold, which it does several times over." A pause. "And you were one of the original signatories. I was the compliance officer of record at the time. The clause doesn't hinge on my employment. It hinges on my signature." Another pause. Jennifer could hear him flipping pages. This could stall the entire transaction. "Only if someone ignores it," she said, "but if addressed properly, could be resolved with a revised signatory memo and acknowledgement." Clean, no headlines. Thomas exhaled like he'd just dodged a train. "I need to escalate this. Quietly. If it leaks, it won't leak from me." He was silent for a few more seconds. "Then, you going to the gala? They didn't invite me." "Well, you're invited now." Jennifer hung up and stared out her window. The sun had slipped behind a cloud, casting her apartment in a pale gray light that reminded her of bank lobbies and empty boardrooms. They were going to try to fix it, of course. Grant's team would scramble, maybe even try to amend the document's post-signature. Maybe they'd ask her to sign a retroactive waiver. But they were late. And being late in Jennifer's world was worse than being wrong. 3 days later, the announcement hit LinkedIn. Cypress Holdings to celebrate historic $375M portfolio transfer at closing gala hosted at the Larchmont Grand. Black tie. Press welcome. Photos showed Grant beaming like he'd just discovered real estate. His teeth could have sliced drywall. The gala was scheduled for 7 p.m., 2 days before closing. Enough time to gloat, not enough time to unwind a legal trigger buried in a clause no one but Jennifer remembered. She received her official invitation via encrypted PDF. No message, just an attached file and a subject line, per Thomas' personal invite. It wasn't even addressed properly. Misspelled her name as Jennifer. She RSVP'd yes. Then she pulled out the folder, the original hard copy of the Crosswell framework with the notarized rider, placed it carefully into her leather case. The stage was being set. She didn't need a spotlight. She needed a table. Grant Pelham's reply to the internal memo was one line, copy-pasted into 5 email chains like it was gospel. "She doesn't work here. She's irrelevant." He even said it aloud in a team sync, laughing as he kicked back in a conference room chair with the kind of self-assurance that only comes from never having been truly cornered in your life. "Look," said, gesturing toward the glass wall behind him, "we don't owe squat to a former VP who left with a severance check and a bad attitude. These deals are ours. The buyer's just trying to flex because it's closing week. It's smoke." The others nodded. No one wanted to be the one to say, actually, she may have a legal kill switch. Meanwhile, over at Bellway Holdings, the mood wasn't so breezy. The buyer's general counsel, a woman named Evelyn Park, had quietly flagged the rider clause in a series of escalating memos. Her language was measured but clear. Per attached framework, compliance rider under Section 11D could render transfer incomplete if unresolved. She attached a copy of the rider, highlighted the clause, time-stamped the analysis, and Grant, he didn't even read it. "We're too deep in," he barked at one point. "Think a technicality from a former compliance relic is going to tank a $375 million closing. Let's not chase ghosts." Funny, because the ghost had already RSVP'd. Jennifer received the courtesy invite 2 days before the gala. This one spelled her name correctly. It came directly from Thomas Klein with a short note, "No pressure, but it might help if you're visible." She responded with one word, "Understood." She arrived at the Larchmont Grand 10 minutes early, dressed in a matte black sheath dress that whispered authority and ended in sharp lines. No jewelry, no frills. Just a leather folio under her arm and a quiet expression that said, "I read everything you skipped." The ballroom looked like a corporate fever dream. Mirrored centerpieces, champagne towers, some DJ named Sil Q playing ambient synth loops like they were meant to summon the ghost of a good quarter. Cyprus staffers milled about in cocktail dresses and overpriced shoes, all trying to look like they weren't exhausted. Grant was at the center of it all, surrounded by flattery and light. He gave interviews to local press, mugged for the camera, and repeated his talking points with cultish discipline. This portfolio is the new benchmark. Vision meets execution. Jennifer sat in the back row, behind a potted ficus, sipping ice water and watching it unfold like the world's most expensive improv show. She spotted Thomas across the room. He gave her a short nod, subtle, nervous. His tie was slightly crooked. She also saw Evelyn Park, scanning the crowd with the alertness of someone looking for a fire exit no one else realized they needed. When her eyes landed on Jennifer, there was no shock. Just a flicker of relief, because here's the truth. Everyone who mattered knew the rider was real. They'd seen the paperwork. They'd run the legal queries. But they also knew that admitting it now, this close to the finish line, would raise questions too big to contain. So the game became stall, smile, hope she doesn't make a scene. Jennifer didn't need to. The deal's final signing ceremony was scheduled for 8:30 p.m. upstairs in the Sequoia room. Grant insisted on making it public. More cameras, more clout. He even had the champagne pre-chilled in a side room, each bottle engraved with the closing date like it was a wedding. As 8 o'clock approached, Jennifer stood and slowly made her way toward the elevator. No rush, no drama. She knew the script better than anyone. Because the one thing Grant never learned, and would now learn the hard way, was that relevance isn't a job title. It's leverage, and she held every ounce of it. Sequoia room looked like money had been poured into it by the gallon. Polished oak, velvet chairs, a chandelier that probably required its own insurance policy. A brass placard on the table read, "Cypress Holdings / Bellway Portfolio Finalization." 8 pens were arranged like surgical instruments. The press sat in a neat row along the wall, ready to document what they thought would be the climax of a rags-to-riches portfolio play. Champagne buckets glistened in the corners. A photographer adjusted her lens. Grant was in full performance mode, laughing too loud, slapping backs, adjusting his cufflinks like he expected a GQ scout to materialize mid-deal. Every gesture screamed, "I won." Jennifer entered last. No announcement. No spotlight. She slipped through the rear door and took a seat against the back wall, folding her coat over her lap. Her folio rested beside her, unopened. It was invisible again, her favorite position. The mood at the table was light. A few Bellway execs whispered among themselves, but the tension in their eyes betrayed the ease in their voices. Jennifer could see it. So could Evelyn Park, who sat near the end of the table with a leather binder full of contracts. She didn't sip champagne. She didn't laugh. She just waited. A junior notary began prepping the signing sequence. Laughter floated around the room. Someone cracked a joke about who'd sign first and get the honor of the ink. Grant chuckled, ladies first, unless it's about credit, then I'll go. And then Evelyn spoke, voice calm but audible. Before we proceed, I'd like to clarify one small matter related to the Crosswell redevelopment. Section 11D, Rider Clause. The room didn't fall silent right away. At first, just a few heads tilted. Grant waved a hand. That's a legacy clause. Our internal counsel cleared that. Doesn't apply. Evelyn didn't smile. She simply slid a page across the table towards Cyprus's lead attorney, a man named Clifford Hawes, who had the haunted look of someone who used to do M and in the 90s and hated surprises. Clifford adjusted his glasses, gave the document a cursory glance, and then a second, slower one. His lips moved slightly as he reread the clause, again and again. The laughter stopped. Jennifer watched the moment the blood drained from his face. Clifford's jaw tightened. He set the paper down, removed his glasses, and looked at Grant. Not with panic yet, but with the exhausted dread of a man watching a train barrel toward him from across the tracks. Grant leaned over. What? Clifford didn't answer. Evelyn cleared her throat. Clause requires unanimous written consent from all original joint venture signatories before any transfer of assets exceeding the outlined threshold. There are 6 such assets in the portfolio. Grant waved again. But she's gone. She doesn't work here. Clifford's voice cracked for the first time in Jennifer's memory. It's not tied to employment, Grant. It's tied to the JV, and it's airtight. Thomas Klein, the buyer's agent, finally turned his head and pointed. Quietly, slowly, to her, he said. Every head in the room followed his finger. Jennifer remained seated. She didn't nod. She didn't speak. She just opened her folio and laid the original signed framework flat on her lap, face up, rider highlighted, notarized stamp gleaming under the overhead light like a quiet little detonator. No gloating, no smirk, just gravity. Clifford looked at her. His hands trembled slightly. He whispered the 2 words that echoed through the silence like a thunderclap. Oh, God. The photographer, sensing tension, slowly lowered her camera. Grant stood still for once in his life. The pens on the table were untouched, and for the first time in 12 years, Jennifer felt the exact center of the room tilt toward her, not with credit, not with applause, but with realization. She doesn't even work here. Grant snapped, voice cracking as his hands slapped the table harder than he meant to. She's a ghost, a relic. This is obstruction. Someone get legal to override this. Clifford didn't move. Evelyn Park didn't blink. The only sound was the gentle fizz of champagne dying in flutes. Jennifer finally stood, not quickly, not dramatically. She just rose like a file drawer being opened, calm, mechanical, deliberate. No override is possible, she said. Rider is contractually tied to personhood under the original joint venture. Section 11D, subclause 2. Not to employment, not to current role. Just name, signature, and consent. She reached into her folio and pulled out a single page in a clear plastic sleeve, then another, then another. She walked to the table with the composure of a notary delivering a death sentence, and placed them, one by one, in front of Evelyn, each document snapping slightly against the wood. Original framework, she said, tapping the first page. Executed rider, the second. Notarized, time-stamped, archived, threefold. One copy submitted to Delaware Corporate Registry. Another submitted with the 2021 Crosswell redevelopment filing. Third is here, in your hands. Evelyn scanned the stamp. The signature blocks. Her lips parted ever so slightly, then pressed together again. Everything's clean, she confirmed. Chain of custody intact. Clause enforceable. Consent required. Across the table, Grant's mouth worked like he wanted to say something useful, but no language could save him now. You're not even on the payroll, he tried again, desperate. You have no standing, no seat at this table. Jennifer didn't flinch. You're right, she said softly. You never gave me a seat. I made my own and I bolted it to the floor. Evelyn looked at Grant. Bellway won't proceed without the final signature. If we close in violation of this clause, we inherit a liability exposure exceeding $80 million across jurisdictions. I'm not risking litigation for ego. Thomas added, more gently, we just want it done right. Grant turned to Clifford, eyes wild. Can't we, I don't know, amend something? Post-date a memo, offer her a release. Clifford exhaled through his nose and shook his head like a priest preparing last rites. No, not without creating a compliance paper trail that invites scrutiny. She's not asking for a seat. She owns the threshold. Everyone looked at Jennifer again. She stepped back from the table, but her presence didn't recede. If anything, it grew. Let's not pretend this is personal, she said. It isn't. It's structural. You removed me from org charts, but not from law. Erased my access, not my authorship. She turned to Evelyn. If Bellway wants the portfolio, they need my signature. And I'm prepared to give it. Grant sagged in his chair like the air had been sucked out of him. The press looked confused. No one quite knew if this was part of the ceremony or a legal nightmare unfolding in real time. Evelyn tapped her pen twice, calm and surgical. We're open to terms. Jennifer nodded once. She returned to her seat, the folio now empty, posture unmoved. And with that, the room stopped pretending it wasn't hers. The silence that followed was different from the one before. This wasn't the awkward lull of realization or the slow digestion of legalese. This was dead air surrender, people blinking, hearts racing, brains trying to buffer their way around a clause they dismissed as ceremonial. Jennifer sat in it like a conductor at the end of a symphony, letting the echo hang before the next movement. Finally, Grant croaked out the question. Quiet, small, barely more than breath. What do you want? Jennifer didn't look at him. She looked straight at Evelyn Park, the only person in the room with power that wasn't borrowed. 3 things, she said. Her voice was level, precise. Not a hint of emotion. 1, public acknowledgement of my role in the portfolio's development, verbal and in writing, prior to close. Grant shifted in his chair, but she didn't stop. Retroactive equity at 1.2%, not from the buyer, but from Cypress Holdings' share of net proceeds. I want a clean calculation with legal backing. Payable within 30 days, a few gasps. Jennifer folded her hands. And 3, a rehire letter. Effective immediately. Title to be Senior Director, Strategic Compliance, with a dotted line report directly to the board. No intermediary, no transitional period, no internal review. I walk in Monday morning with access and authority, or I don't sign. You could hear the wallpaper peel. Grant opened his mouth, but Evelyn raised a hand before he could vomit whatever bluff he was about to attempt. She turned to Jennifer. May I step out to confirm terms with our general counsel? Jennifer nodded once. Evelyn left. The room held its breath. Grant leaned toward Clifford. Can we fight this? Clifford didn't even look up, just stared at his legal pad like it had personally betrayed him. She's not asking for the building, he muttered. She is the building. You should be grateful she's not charging interest. Thomas Klein, whose shirt was now visibly damp under the collar, glanced at Grant, then to Evelyn, who re-entered the room and gave a simple nod. She's clean. We agree to the terms. Thomas turned back toward Grant. You good with that? Grant didn't speak. He didn't nod, just slowly removed his glasses and pressed them into the table like he was trying to crack the wood. Clifford turned to Jennifer. We'll amend the documents. A rider will be attached with the updated equity clause, and your reinstatement letter will be notarized before you leave. Jennifer stood. She walked calmly to the signing table, picked up one of the previously untouched pens, hers now, by weight of gravity, and signed. 1 line. That was it. Evelyn slid a separate folder toward her, the rehire letter. Jennifer opened it. Read it once. At the bottom, next to her printed name, it already said, Title, Senior Director, Strategic Compliance. Reporting, Board of Directors. Effective immediately. She signed again. Slower this time. Then she placed the pen down, no smile, no smirk, just a subtle, almost imperceptible exhale. The press, sensing something massive had occurred but unsure what, began whispering. Camera flashed. Somewhere in the room, someone clapped once, then stopped. Evelyn turned toward Jennifer. Is this acceptable? Jennifer nodded. It's accurate. Then she turned to leave. No champagne, no photo ops, no seat at the congratulatory dinner. She didn't need to celebrate, because in the end, she didn't torch the empire. She didn't ruin the closing. She didn't scream or flip a table or threaten lawsuits. She just owned the clause no one read. And in doing so, quietly, irrevocably, she owned them all. You're the real stars of the corporate jungle. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe, or I'll flick the switch on your old cubicle memories.